Good morning and welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. This is Robert Phoenix broadcasting to you live from what is going to be exceedingly hot California. Apparently, the temperatures are going to be in excess of 100 degrees over the course of the next couple of days. These are Arizona-like temperatures, so, excuse me, I'm getting out of Dodge. It's so funny. It's like I left Texas as the rain it wasn't as the rain was hitting, it was as it was receding or stopping, and now I'm leaving California just before this massive heat wave that's about to come into town. It's like I'm dodging weather all across the country. How is everybody today? I've had a great time coming back to the place that I spent the majority of my life, and I've seen some old friends over the course of the last few days, and got to spend some quality time with my mother, which has been a real revelation and very healing in a lot of ways. You know, we're always refining our relationship with our parents to some degree over the course of a lifetime, and this has been one of the best days that I've had with her, so I'm really grateful for that. And it's been a fascinating, just on a personal level, it's been a fascinating experience for me because I've spent the last 5 years of my life in Texas, which I'm returning to. And I've talked about this before. I've had some pretty good professional success and momentum in Texas, more so in a lot of ways than in California. But on a personal note, I've never experienced a more lonely place than Austin, and it has to do with my chart, my relocated chart, and I know all about. And listen, I've got some wonderful listeners, and they have been, some of them have been lovingly sharing their astrological knowledge with me, which is about, hey, when you move, your chart changes. Indeed, I know this. And I think there's a bit of a disconnect because some people don't understand that I'm actually a working astrologer along with being a gadfly and doing my best to break things down for you. So, yeah, my chart changed when I moved to Texas, and it became, how should I say this, a little more desolate. So my opportunities for fulfillment in the wonderful Lone Star State are really centered around work. And that's it. That's it. So if I can just put my head down and be a 56-year-old version of Ray Kroc, I think it'll all be good. But there are interesting things that happen here in California for me on a phenomenological level. Number one, it's on the coast, and we know that the energy bands, the magnetic energy bands, come in from the coast on both sides of the country, and by the time they get to the center of the country, they've dissipated. This is why the coasts always go through rapid change, more so than other parts of the country. Greg Braden, I think it was the book Awakening to Zero Point, if I'm not mistaken, which was a watershed book back in the 90s, talks about this. I think it was one of Greg's first books. And he really broke down the sort of the metaphysical, geophysical anatomy of change as it relates to people living in this country, the rest of the world. I'm sure there's a version of that on the coasts of Europe, although the coasts of Europe don't seem to be populated as densely as they are here in the United States. I guess maybe on the Spanish side, but I think mostly Northern Europe. So last night, as far as the phenomenological stuff, I'm also a Leo rising with Uranus on my ascendant here. And I used to have all kinds of crazy synchronicities take place. So last night I was at one of my favorite places in the Bay Area called the Hotel Mac, which is in Point Richmond where I used to live. And I'm sitting down having a conversation with these two women, and one of the women was waxing enthusiastically about her son, who's the same age as my son, and she was telling me about what a good basketball player her son is. And I asked her son's name, and before she said the name, I knew the name. Popped right into my head, and the name was Elijah. Elijah. And I knew it. It was a really fascinating kind of moment that happens in California. In Texas, well, it's a whole different story. Anyway, we're going to be talking more about Texas today. We're going to turn our attention away from me and into Harvey. We're going to steer our ship into the storm that has left people devastated in parts of Houston, Port Arthur, Port Aransas, Rockwall, or not Rockwall, and I guess Galveston, Corpus didn't get hit all that bad, which is apparently where Trump sort of flew out of and landed. I got a text from somebody in Texas. This is from Elizabeth in Houston. Lots of stories to share of people coming together in H-Town. That's great. Disaster brings out the best and the worst of us. Currently, it's the dam at Barker, Cypress, and Addicks. That's ADDICKS that are the problem, because these dams are overflowing with water. What they're afraid of is they're afraid of the dams bursting. And now here's what I would do. Because if the dam bursts, that is huge. I mean, you're dealing with not just the amount of water, but the sheer violence of water. If you are not familiar with what water can do in a brief period of time, volume-wise, let me tell you, it is the most massive force we have. Massive. Let me compare it to wind for a second. And wind is a pretty powerful force. 150 mile per hour winds, 50 mile per hour winds. Those are pretty intense winds. They die down at some point. Water doesn't have to move that fast. It just has to have volume. I remember this was back around 2010. I was watching footage of the flooding in Australia, which was blowing my mind. And I would see massive amounts of water, and it would just rise. It would just come into parking lots and in streets, and it would just move tractor trailer trucks like they were Tonka toys. I mean, just literally float them, lift them off the ground, and push them downstream to wherever that water was going and hitting whatever was in its path. That is the nature of water. It is extremely powerful and not to be underestimated. So we have these dams now in Houston that are swelling to overflowing. If I lived in Houston, what I would do is I would actually send out, because in Texas they take care of business, right? We're going to talk about that and why Texas is now in the crosshairs. I mentioned this yesterday, that op-ed piece that came out of Newsweek about the guy who was bitching and moaning about how Texans are too indulgent with their own personal freedoms to the point where they sacrifice their own and others' personal safety as a result. This is the new meme. This is the new theme. People have their guns blazing now at Texas, and the ideology of self-determination and to some degree the lack of regulation as it relates to the government zoning and codes. Look, there are wonderful examples of this in Texas. Comfort, Texas is an incredible example of an unincorporated area that has been sought out by people who want to live a life that's more free than not. And that's the bottom line. And they've gone in and they've transformed a very sleepy town into a wonderful place that has shops and restaurants and co-op electricity. Anyway, I don't want to get lost in the weeds around that. We're going to talk about Texas, but if I were living in Texas, I would send people taking care of business, which is what Texans do. I'd send them out to those dams, and I'd send them with guns. And I know this sounds barbaric. I'd send them out with guns. Why would I send them there with guns? Because I would not want anybody to blow those dams, because we know what happened in Katrina. They blew the levees. They blew the levees. Spike Lee did a film about Katrina. He touched upon this briefly. He did a huge misservice to the American people and the people that lived in New Orleans by not addressing this more deeply at the time. The levees were blown. That was the problem. It wasn't that the water was released, the levees were blown. And then, of course, the various wards in New Orleans were flooded. And, you know, there are parts of Houston where people are actually functional. You know, the people are actually going back to stores. Stores are getting supplies again. People are actually going out and going to Starbucks. I mean, there are parts that you won't see this on TV because they don't want to show you the fact that there are parts of Houston that are not flooded. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a major issue that's going on there. That's not to diminish the damage and really the tragedy to a lot of lives, many lives that have taken place. But you'll never see. And meanwhile, in the blankety blank district, life goes on. You know, you won't see that because number one, it doesn't sell. You want disaster. Networks want disaster. They want cover to cover, station to station, wall to wall disaster. That's going to be their coverage. The human tragedy, the human suffering, tales of courage, right? And those are all very real. I don't want to dismiss that, but you won't see the other stuff. Because what happens if you see this and people go, well, maybe it's not as bad as we thought it was. And I'm not saying it's not bad. I'm just giving you just like with New Orleans. Most people were under the impression that the entire city was flooded. No, that's not true. That's not true. The French Quarter was untouched. Really, for the most part, really untouched by Katrina. They had no desire of wiping out the French Quarter. They just wanted to wipe out people that had, guess what, generational real estate. People that had their homes that were given to them by their parents, who might have had those homes given to them by their parents. They wanted those people out. They wanted that land. They wanted to redevelop it. So guess what? A lot of the folks that got blown out by Katrina, guess where they're living? Houston. Guess what they're going through? Same thing. Think about it. So the media does not portray or give any insight into other things that are happening there. And of course, you know, if they did that, then perhaps the Red Cross might actually take in less money and less donations. And we certainly want to pump up the Red Cross. No, we don't. The Red Cross the recent history of the Red Cross is about as bad as it gets. You want to donate, you want to throw some money down, I'll tell you who to get the money to, J.J. Watt, who's raised about $6 million in the course of a week. J.J. Watt plays for the Houston Texans, and J.J. Watt's kind of he's like the modern version in some ways of Paul Bunyan. You know, he's like, J.J. Watt's like Paul Bunyan and Babe Ruth, and I don't know, John Cena all rolled into one. And JJ he's from Wisconsin. He has two other brothers, Ted and TJ, and both Ted and TJ are also in the National Football League. And JJ Watt he's just a physical specimen, a freak. I think if I'm not mistaken, like a 0 degrees Aries or 1 degree Aries. If I'm not mistaken, it's like, wow, this guy's the embodiment of will. Anyway, JJ's an incredible player and a super, super good guy. Super good guy. And he's raised $6 million for the people of Houston. He's shooting for $10 million. He started at $1 million, got to $6 million. Now he's shooting for $10 million. And I think it's great. I think there are, now he's going to go hand that over to the Red Cross? I sure as hell hope not. Because if he is, he should take a cut. But there are other entities besides the Red Cross that you can donate to if you feel like you need to or want to. I was listening to some sports talk radio yesterday, and there's a guy out of the Bay Area here, and he's very successful in terms of writing, and he's made a nice transition from print journalism to radio. His name is Rick, R-I-C, Rick Bucher, B-U-C-H-E-R, and Rick is really bright. He's originally from Cincinnati, covered the Warriors for a very long time. And I was listening to his sports talk radio show, which is actually on Sirius, and he was talking about Colin Kaepernick. And I'm going to bring this back around to Houston, so hang with me here. He was talking about Colin Kaepernick, and Rick, obviously, excuse me, Rick obviously is a Kaepernick supporter. He is he's somebody who believes that it's important for Kaepernick and other players in the NFL to continue their protest so that we can have social change. Okay. But that's Rick's prerogative. He can support that. But he's wrong on a number of his points, and I don't want to get into it. But he did something yesterday which I thought was pretty audacious. And I'd like for you to chime in. I don't often ask your opinion, although I should probably do it more because you guys are so smart. But his premise was, we don't want our athletes to use their platform to shove their views in front of us. Whatever those views are. Left of center, right of center. We watch sports so that we can have a distraction. I've talked about this before. The reason why sports are popular, besides the fact that we're inundated with it, and it is a distraction for many of us, men and women, but I'm going to chime in on the men's side, is that it is the one arena of our lives where when you participate, not always when you watch it, because most of these games are rigged, and I'll be the first to admit that, but when you participate, there is something about the definitive result. Like there's no gray area with sports, especially if you're playing a sport like baseball, where every player in the field is isolated. And if a ball is hit to you, nobody's going to help you field that ball. There is a definitive outcome on any given play. Now, we may get in the weeds around a call at a base, which does happen. A pitch that might be off the strike zone by 2 to 3 inches, called a strike. So the gray areas do seep into sports. Don't get me wrong, even when you play them. But the thing that sports does over any other part of life, with maybe the exception of sales, which is very similar to sports, is there's a definitive outcome. In sales, what do? You either close the deal or you don't. Ultimately, I mean, if you're farming deals and you've got about 10 deals that are in the gray land, that'll never kind of manifest. You keep going back and you keep, I don't know, maybe not this week. Why don't you check back with us in about 30 days? Anybody who has done sales knows those people. And at some point, it's a non-sale. You just move on, right? But there's a definitive. You either get the sale or you don't get the sale. The same thing happens in sports. And this is why I think and I'm going to speak for the men out there. I'm not going to speak just for everybody because I'm a man and this is my experience. I'm sure women have the same experience as well. But there is something, and again, I may be treading upon, hallowed ground, but men need something definitive in their lives besides commitment. That's a joke, by the way. That's a joke. Anyway, this is why sports are popular. There's a winner and a loser. There's a play where there's something defined in the play. I mean, even in a sport like football, which is a team sport, and you can have a play that is successful even if you don't do your job. There's that gray area in football. Like, let's say, for instance, you're blocking somebody and you miss your block. And the guy gets past you and he's headed to the quarterback, but you got a really sharp quarterback who sees it, avoids the rush, throws it to another player who then turns that play into something positive. So you failed to do your job, but somebody, and this is where football comes in as a team sport. Like baseball is the ultimate sport where you're an individual and then you have 8 other individuals. Baseball is very query in that way. It's a team sport, and yet the individual must stand out. The individual must be able to pull their weight and take care of their moment in time when called upon. Football, if you miss that block, the quarterback bails you out, and the next thing you know, you got a touchdown. Boom, you're done. Right? He covered you. The quarterback covered you, and the running back or the receiver covered you. They had your back. That's the team. That's the team aspect of don't worry. We win together, we lose together. But if that quarterback doesn't make that play, then the guy coming in, of course, crushes him, and the next thing you know, you really didn't do your job. But you can get away with it. There's some similarities to basketball. Anyway, so what Rick Beaker was talking about was that if we don't like our athletes to have political positions and we just want them to play and entertain us and distract us, then why should J.J. Watt be any different? Because he's using his platform to move a social agenda forward. And is that social? This is where the logic befuddles me. Is that social agenda comparable to to a large degree the abstract nature of what Colin Kaepernick and some of the players who are sitting on a knee at the start of the national anthem? He's comparing the two. One is a dire emergency. A dire emergency. People have gotten their homes blown out, possessions gone. Things like blankets gone, right? Or people need things like blankets, food, whatever. In this moment. And he's saying that there's a comparable level of taking advantage of the platform. And I vehemently disagree. Now, one could say, well, the inner cities, are hit by Harvey every single day. It's a hurricane of oppression, depression, economic privation, right, or deprivation. So yeah, I mean, you can make that kind of an argument if you stretch it out, contextualize it. But I think the two are very, very different. They're very, very different. So maybe Colin Kaepernick can do the same thing that J.J. Watt is doing and say, hey, I'm taking donations for, this community. This month we're targeting this. And I know he does. Colin has put a lot of money into his own cause in a lot of ways. So I'm not dissing him for that. But I just think it's completely, he's trying to use really distorted logic. I mean, this is a total emergency. It transcends any group. Any group. There's going to be about 500,000 vehicles totaled, scrapped in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. Think about that. The flood damage to a car is devastating. Once a car is water damaged, it's pretty much useless. Back in the old days, when we had cars without computers and chips, and we basically had just pretty much engines and metal bodies, cars could suffer more water damage than they can now because there's so many moving parts in cars these days. So we're going to have 500,000, estimated 500,000 cars that'll be ready for the scrap heap. And it's fascinating to watch what's coming out of the left, which is, it boggles the mind, totally boggles the mind. Texas deserved this. This was karma for voting Donald Trump into the White House. Couldn't have happened to a better state. Too bad more Texans didn't die. Maybe they lost all their, maybe they lost thousands of guns in the process. Thank God. Now we're also getting the narrative around, well, this is global warming in action. If Texas had simply jumped on the carbon tax bandwagon, they may not have experienced Hurricane Harvey, which is a bunch of horse shit. But this is what we're getting now. People are demanding that Greg Abbott step down as governor. Are you kidding me? This is the most absurd and insane logic I've heard in a long time. I mean, this guy jumped into a disaster. Disasters happen. They happen. Did they say Ray Nagin should have resigned? No. He eventually got in big trouble. Ray Nagin, the former mayor of New Orleans. Did they demand that the governor of Louisiana resign? No. Did they demand that Chris Christie resign after Sandy? No. But it's fashionable now to bash Texas as a bastion of the right and conservative and all the distorted and hateful and ignorant, closed-minded, bigoted, and racist thinking. My God. Anyway, that's what's going on. That is what's happening. That is what's happening. We live in such a distorted world. It's not even funny. I tell people, even here in California, just briefly, where do you live? I live in Texas. And they get this look on their face. Oh, you poor dear. You poor dear, you have to live in Texas with those abominable Texans. Look, I may not have the best astrological chart for anything social in Texas. But I'll tell you right now, I've met a lot of really good people in Texas. A lot of good people. And this whole idea that Texans are bigoted and hateful and closed-minded, no, they're not. They're not. And I've hung out with a number of Texans. The one group of Texans that kind of bothers me, though, you can find them anywhere, are some of the hipsters in Austin. They're just like too cool for school. They're just too cool for school. That bothers me. You can find the hipsters anywhere. 500,000 cars totaled and scrapped in the wake of Harvey. That's huge. Huge. Somebody's going to make money off of it, though. The scrap business with those cars. I mean, it's basically just going to get taken away, and somebody's going to process those cars. And 500,000 is a lot of scrap. Somebody's going to make some money off of it. The other thing, obviously, that we're having to deal with is going to be oil production, gas production. We talked about this over the last couple of days. Of course, we're dealing with now sort of the fallout of, I don't think whatever happened or has happened with Harvey has really affected Beaumont and Lake Charles to the point where they're having to shut those facilities down at the same rate as they're having to shut down some major facilities in Houston. Now, there's a possibility that we could be dealing with another tropical storm on the back end. You know, a relative of Harvey coming into Houston in the near future, perhaps over the next few days, next week, in which case it could be pretty serious. But there are other things going on in the world and on the planet. North Korea fired a missile over Japan. And that's pretty significant. You know, it's like somebody fired a missile over Florida. And it's like, oh, wow. Cuba just fired a missile over Florida. It's kind of hard to do because they'd have to go all the way over the top of the country. But you understand what I'm sharing with you here. And the prospect of doing something in North Korea is getting more and more real by the day. And I know a lot of people out there think that nothing will happen with North Korea. It's going to be a lot of saber rattling. At some point, Trump is going to go beyond his fiery bluster with his Mars on his ascendant, with the backing of his troika of generals, and they could flip the nuclear switch. But to be clear, there is inherent risk in that is so significant. Japan is not, you can see North Korea from Japan. You can see it. It's that close. And South Korea is right, Seoul is right across the border from the border that separates North and South Korea. If we go in and use the nuke option, the bunker busters, that area could be put at such a high amount of risk that it boggles the mind of what we could do. And South Korea is a huge producer of things like cell phones, computers, video cameras, cars. Now, of course, they have plants in other parts of the world, but they also have plants and do a lot of the business in South Korea. And you damage South Korea, and it is a big hit to the tech industry, not just to mention the lives of the people living there. I think it's completely insane. And yet, we seem to be lurching towards some kind of tragic denouement. We have the sanctions, the starving of the people. Remember, everybody in North Korea is a soldier. Not everybody's a soldier in this country, trust me. But everybody's a soldier in North Korea. Could you imagine, let's say we had to fight a war on this soil. Could you imagine who would fight and who wouldn't fight? Let's say it was from an external, it wasn't, we weren't having a civil war. Let's say China decides that they're going to invade the United States, which they already kind of have in some ways. But let's say that happens. Who's going to fight in a war like that? Do you think the people who are living in Dearborn, Michigan, are going to raise up arms against the Chinese because they love America so much? I don't think so. You know, I mean, certainly there would be some significant resistance. I'm not sure everybody's going to fight. Let's put it that way. North Korea, everybody's going to fight. Every single man, woman, and child, whether they like it or not, are a soldier. And they will take up arms against whomever is threatening their existence. That's the difference. It's so funny, right? Because Alex Jones he's just banging the drum on North Korea now. He's got his talking points. In a lot of ways, I mean, North Korea is more nationalistic than the United States. North Korea abhors globalism. North Korea doesn't want the taint of globalism inside of its borders. It rejects globalism. Now, a lot of people, well, not a lot, certain people say, well, North Korea is really this controlled environment. And inside North Korea, we have a CIA asset in Kim Jong-un, and they're playing this role. And that could be partially true. It's a pretty big creation, to be honest with you, managed by the CIA or the globalist forces. But North Korea at its heart is nationalistic. So you would think that somebody like Alex Jones would champion the fact that they don't want to be a part of the global family. They don't want to be a part of the IMF. They don't want to be a part of the World Bank, which are the gateways of globalism. And yet he's demonizing North Korea as being a communist hellhole and a dictatorial, tyrannical, despotic little hermit kingdom, right? When in actuality, they're much more nationalistic than this country is. But that's not the script. The script is to flip North Korea and get them into the World Bank, into the IMF, and do whatever it takes in order for that to happen. With Iran and Syria to follow suit as quickly as possible. Because they have to. They have to have the money change. They have to have the money change starting 2020. I mean, we'll see the beginnings of the money change. Speaking of money, let's get into a little bit of money talk, shall we? The Rothschilds are dumping lots of money. Let me just read this to you here. Pay attention to this. Because when the Rothschilds dump their assets, we know that there is something going on here. Let me just see if I can find the piece. Sometimes I feel like I get a little paranoid, but I feel like my technology is manipulated at times. I got a text yesterday about yesterday's show that it wasn't playing properly on YouTube. You know what's amazing about my YouTube numbers? I had one of my Harvey shows, the first one I really did, which was Tuesday this week. I have like 18 comments. And it was, it's like people, really dialoguing and chiming in. And I have like, 250 views. So it's really fascinating to watch the ratio of commentary versus the ratio of what's happening from a view standpoint, which is highly unusual. Trying to get this window open about this piece where the Rothschilds are dumping their assets, and unfortunately, I'm having a hard time. Let me try this again. Yeah, something's weird with computer. Let me see if I can dial, because I really want to read this. Let me get back into my computer, my version of the computer. So I'm working off two different monitors here. So let me just do this. Hang in there. We're going to talk about this. It's important. We have to stay on top of this stuff. All right, here we go. Here's the story. Okay, so it says, this is from Activist Post. It says, Rothschild just dumped massive amounts of U.S. assets, sending an ominous signal. The author here is Jay Sermopoulos. In what is a sure signal to oligarchs across the globe, Lord Jacob Rothschild, founder and chairman of the RIT Capital Partners, has substantially minimized his exposure to what he views as a risky and unstable U.S. capital market. In the half-yearly financial report for RIT Capital Partners, Rothschild explained the company's aggressive moves to significantly reduce exposure to U.S. assets. We do not believe this is an appropriate time to add risk. Share prices have in many cases risen to unprecedented levels. At a time when economic growth is by no means assured, Rothschild said in his semi-annual report. So what they did is they pumped up the market on steroids. And by the way, the economy is reaching 3% growth, which is significant under the leadership of an embattled president. But the 3% growth is in some ways direct opposition to what is going on with the Rothschilds and their dumping of their stocks. So we had they had a massive run on Wall Street over the course of the last year, record numbers, and now they're pulling out. Additionally, Rothschild stated that he believes quantitative easing programs employed by central banks such as the Federal Reserve will come to an end. He believes, no, he knows they will. So the quantitative easing, which was basically it was like free money. Huge amounts of cash printed, pumped, dumped, sold to banks, so that banks could then turn around and loan that money out at an extremely low interest rate to essentially pump the economy with steroids. That's coming to an end. So this gets into, astrologically, what we've been talking about with money change. When Uranus goes into Taurus, briefly, for a few months in 2018. And I'll be talking about this in Houston, hopefully, at the new Paracon conference on the 16th and the 17th of September. So I'll be going down there in a couple of weeks, and I'll have some firsthand sort of looks into the damage that's occurred, and hopefully it'll have dried out. Of course, what's left over as the waters recede will be a horror story in terms of personal items, goods, dead animals, people, who knows at that point. Rothschild was quoted in the report saying the period of monetary accommodation may well be coming to an end. There you go. There it is. The Lord has spoken, signaling a potential disaster in the making in the United States financial markets. Rothschild reduced the investments RIT Capital Partners has in the U.S. dollar by nearly 50%. How about that? On December 31st, 2016, RIT Capital Partners reported a 62% net value asset investment in U.S. dollars. In the latest report released by RIT Capital Partners on June 30th, 2017, the company has 37% net value. So they've dropped their net value by almost half. That's pretty significant. And this is on Activist Post if you want to check this out. Over the same period of time, Rothschild increased RIT's investment in the sterling, euro, and the Japanese yen. Just last year, the bond manager of what was once the world's largest bond fund had a dire prediction about how all of this will end. And by all of this, he means the propping up of financial markets by central banks. This is Janice Henderson. Gross, it's a tweet, gross, global yields lowest in 500 years of recorded history, 10 trillion of negative rate bonds. This is a supernova that will explode one day. 10 trillion in negative rate bonds. When the U.S. stock market is traded at an all-time high, it should be, the U.S. stock market is trading at an all-time, but Lord Rothschild is divesting RIT from those same markets. The central bank manipulation of market valuations becomes apparent. Additionally, it's worth noting that Rothschild's RIT investment portfolio has returned 2,000% since its formation. So he obviously understands how to position his assets. He had big returns on investments. Thus, these recent moves should be a red flag to every American. So here we go. File that away while we're talking about. I mean, look. I think social. What is the nature of social change? If we have more prosperity, if we have more of an ability to be creative, more of an ability to be imaginative, more of an ability to have personal technology be a part of our lives that can become more empowering, whether it's free energy or cheaper energy or the 3D printer, maybe minus CRISPR, I don't know. But if we have more of these things available to us, then we could have more people benefiting from them. And that's the real social change. The social change has to do with the liberation of technology so that people can use that technology to have more elegant, more streamlined, more personally empowered lives and experiences. You know, we've stalled out at the cell phone as the apex of personal technology for the last 10 years. There hasn't been anything really that has come along and moved the needle quite like the cell phone, which is not the best arbiter of any of this. About 2 years ago, I was in Philadelphia, and it was on Martin Luther King Day. They had a big march in Philadelphia. This is pre BLM was around, but it wasn't like they were leading the march. You know, you had the IEWE, the various unions, the Workers of the World, the same groups that have been morphed and splintered into other groups over the course of the last few years. And they had their signs out, and they're saying, we want to. We want a living wage. We want $15 an hour. They're pounding for $15 an hour. And really, I sat there and I said, okay, well, just keep pounding the pavement. Just keep pounding the asphalt. Because in 10 years, your $15 an hour job is going to be replaced by a robot. Your $15 an hour job working at Subway will be replaced by a robot. It's like you better get your eyes on the future. See what's coming. What's coming is the obsolescence of your $15 an hour job. But that's all they cared about, and they don't want to hear about it. You want to understand change? These people have no clue. They have no clue what's coming, and yet they'll use this whole notion of change as a wedge to just drive it like a stake between every single American who has some opinion on the subject. That's the real social change. If people don't wake up to it sooner rather than later, they're going to get completely blindsided as a result. There's a lot more going on we could talk about. We could talk about what's happening with the Awans. There's a new account that they found with the Awans. We could talk about Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the security breaches. All those are very real. They're very, very real. We can talk about, finally, the Democrats now are starting to admit that Antifa is a gang. Because the optics around Antifa are not great. They're not great. And your average Trump supporter, your average conservative American, they're not the ones that were shipped in and bussed in to Charlottesville. There are people who are in Charlottesville who saw the KKK, Antifa, get off the same bus. Yeah, that's right. There are eyewitnesses who saw that. But your average conservative Trump supporter, they're not. They're not going to go get a baseball bat and start cracking heads because they're not going to fill up a water balloon with their piss and start throwing it at somebody because that person may be wearing a shirt that has a circle and an A inside of it because it stands for anarchy, or maybe they're wearing a purple shirt and somehow in their minds they've figured out that we're part of this color revolution, the purple revolution. Hello, Prince. And they're gonna chuck their latex piss bomb at them. No, they don't do that. The optics there are not the same. Now you get the neo Nazis and the quote unquote KKK. It's always easy to just throw a hood over somebody's face. Those optics aren't great, but they're a small, very small, infinitesimally small percentage. And what's happened with Charlottesville is everybody who has a voice, who does not want to comply with the program or the pogrom, is guilty by association and have been tarnished in some ways by what's happened. So even myself, and I try to be as fair as possible, even myself, who, when I speak up or speak out against the insanity of the left and not wanting to bow down to the demagogues of political correctness and really want to champion a level of free speech and free thought, by my association with those principles, I am now linked to the most extreme examples of what they are. And that's a fact, Jack. So these are the times we're living in. Kathy Griffin's back. Now she's not sorry about Trump's severed head. She feels like she's got some momentum on her side. Great. Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So perhaps for a moment, just like the eclipse brought us together briefly for an hour and a half, perhaps what's happened in Houston might bring us together in some ways. Although, as we've been seeing, there are people who really think that not enough damage was done to Texas or Texans. So that really may not be the case. But potentially, an event like this could theoretically bring us together. I'll tell you what will bring us together is if the economy completely tanks and Trump presides over an economy that has been absolutely, utterly destroyed. That'll bring us together. That'll be, it's like the Depression brought everybody together except for the people that got out of the stock market before they artificially crashed it. That could bring us together. A war with North Korea, would that bring us together? I don't know. Maybe. But I doubt it. Perhaps an alien invasion or something as ominous as Nibiru, that might bring us together. But until those events happen, we are a country divided, which is utterly unfortunate. And that's the way they've set it up. And the best thing that you can do is to be unified inside yourself to the best of your ability. Body, mind, spirit. Align it. Stay healthy, stay clear, and stay productive in your own way. The productive part is very important. I was watching the movie The Founder the other night. A story of Ray Kroc and the birth of McDonald's. Ray Kroc really should have been Ray Crocodile. I mean, that guy's... Michael Keaton's portrayal of Ray Kroc was phenomenal. Phenomenal. Clearly, Ray Kroc was no intellectual. But he had a business sense And he was acute enough with his business sense. But you know what Ray Kroc had? Persistence. Persistence. His persistence ultimately paid off and triggered his latent sociopathic genes, amoral genes, so he could essentially take McDonald's over and snatch it from the hands of the McDonald brothers. Anyway, persistence, which is what I wanted to share and distill out of that brief summation of the founder, is really another part of all this. Endurance, persistence, the ability to go the long haul, to be productive in a time where productivity is not always rewarded. All right, that's it. We've reached the end of today's 15 Minutes of Flame. I want to thank everybody for chiming in as usual. And I'll be back tomorrow. Guess who's going to be on the show tomorrow? Stephen Creamy. He'll be with me. And we'll be talking about all kinds of interesting stuff. And we're going to talk tonight, actually, do the pre-record and get that together. So please join me tomorrow on the Friday Farcast. Use your head to discern what's real. Your heart to stay open to what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. I'll see you guys tomorrow, 12 noon, Central Standard Time.